Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, that's time already? Whoa.
Welcome in to another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Rauf, joined as always by my co-host, Connor Hope. Riley Davis is off tonight. He is gallivanting around Mexico, having a good time for a week. He'll be back next week. So it's just me and Connor here to break down the opening couple days of games. We finally got to the start of the season. It's been anticlimactic, I think I would say, for the most part. You know, the Champions Classic typically highlights the start of the season. Due to election day and election night, that's pushed back now to next week. So the opening days, opening week of games doesn't have really any high-profile matchups, Connor, but there were like 120-something games on Monday night, so there was certainly plenty of action. People want the high-profile matchups, and I get that, but I also don't totally hate the way things have played out so far.
No, I actually really like the way the season is set up. We all want high-profile matchups early, and that makes sense. What we saw in games like the North Carolina-UNC Wilmington game, like the TCU game, even the Creighton game, like these top teams need opportunities to build themselves into a kind of not even mid-season form, but like early season form, and to have those high profile matchups on opening night or in the first 3 days of the season, I think do a disservice to those teams, and it does a disservice to the fans, because a matchup between Kansas and Kentucky on opening night, while it's great, right, isn't going to be the same as a matchup between Kansas and Kentucky the first weekend. And that's the other thing. The weekend, like, we all want these high profile matchups early, but you have to remember the season starts on a Monday, and if you want to take advantage of being not only the fans being able to watch all of those matchups, but the schools being able to get those, you know, matchups that are earlier in the day still sold out, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, those are the days that you want those high profile matchups to be, especially the first week of the season. We still got plenty of great games. We had the overtime game. We had a couple of big upsets and near upsets. And so, you know, we didn't get the you know, Titan matchups that we have in the past, but we had a lot of good games, and we had a lot of games where you could see a lot of what was going to happen over the course of the season. And then this weekend is where it kind of starts to unfold. I know there's not a ton of really high-profile matchups this weekend, but you've got the aircraft carrier game between Gonzaga and Michigan State on Friday to kind of kick it off, and I like the slate better this weekend, obviously, than the early part of the week. But again, I'd rather see Kentucky play Kansas later in the non-conference. I'd rather see that Kentucky-Gonzaga Baylor game later in the non-conference. There's a reason why the Thanksgiving, I mean, other than it's a holiday, there's a reason why the Thanksgiving Day, your Thanksgiving tournaments are held during Thanksgiving, and not like true kickoff tournaments. And that's just because you want those teams playing the best basketball they can when they face each other. And even though we have these two, you know, you're allowed to play two exhibitions early on in the season, those are really used for experimentation and seeing what you have. You want to get these teams into a true game-to-game flow, I feel like, before they even start playing each other.
Yeah, I don't mind it being like a sort of preseason. Like, I know, like, games count, obviously, like that, and I think they should. But I did get a really good feeling Monday night of it was like, okay, we're underway. It felt like everybody was playing, and it was only 2/3 of the country pretty much was playing. So it felt like everybody was playing, and there weren't those high-profile matchups like we've talked about, but it was a lot of scoreboard watching, and it's close over here. Oh, Indiana's struggling. TCU's down how many points? And so being able to look at all of that in the context of everybody's playing, we don't know what's going to happen. There are some potential chaos scenarios going on here. That was a lot of fun. It was tough to keep up with. It would be awesome, I think, if we had this preseason week almost. And I know it's impossible because of TV contracts, but if there was some sort of red zone where it was all right, we need to go check in on Indiana because they're struggling the first half. Stetson is up a whole bunch on Florida State. Things are getting tricky. Let's check that out for a while. They go to commercial. We'll flip to TCU because TCU couldn't hit water if they fell out of a boat for the first half. That's interesting. If there was something that could have pulled a whole bunch of things together for you in a viewing experience, I think that would have completely changed the way this was viewed.
And even from just a broadcasting perspective, right? I mean,
yeah.
I don't know the numbers, but I can imagine that ESPN Plus, right, for example, gets a whole bunch of subscriptions between November and March. And not that they don't have football games on ESPN Plus, but there's so few football games when you compare them to the amount of basketball games that are going on. TCU was down by 20 and nobody could watch the stream because it was so, unstable. It kept dropping. But it was TCU against Arkansas Pine Bluff. It wasn't TCU against Kansas State that's a conference game, but a similar level of opponent. It wasn't TCU against another high major opponent where everyone wants to watch that game. They were tuning into that game because the score looked interesting, but it gives ESPN some time to reacclimate their servers and their hosting to handle the amount of people that are watching these matchups on their service, which I think is also a good thing from a TV perspective. So I know it's understandable. You are justified as a fan in thinking, the season's underway and there's no marquee matchup for at least unless you count Gonzaga, Michigan State, there's really no super marquee matchup in the first week. But again, it's going to pick up. There's a bunch of really good matchups coming in the next 2 to 3 weeks. It's just this first week, see what your team has. If you're Youngstown State or if you're, James Madison, you're feeling pretty good about what you saw this week, right? If you're Baylor, if you're Tennessee, if you're some of these other teams that just had no issue in games that they should have won big, but just start to finish, no issue. You're feeling pretty good about what you have. If you're Villanova, you're feeling good about the fact that you don't have that marquee matchup at the beginning of the season where your injured players could affect the outcome.
Right.
So, there's a lot of positives, I think, with the slow roll of these early season matchups, as opposed to what we've had in the past where, Kentucky against Kansas as an opening night game this year, Kentucky would have been down their two best players.
Yeah. And Kansas handled their business eventually against Omaha, but they did not look like you would expect a typical Kansas-Omaha matchup to be because Kansas is still experimenting some things. Is KJ Adams going to play the 5? That probably works out best for them, but they've tried a couple different things in exhibitions and now in this game to figure that out. That was one of the things that you pointed out in the article up on heatcheckcbb.com about your biggest takeaways from opening night is that top 25 teams, none of them lost. TCU was the very close, almost exception to that, but we're able to hold on against Pine Bluff. That none of them, I think, looked as dominant as you're saying as they probably will in a month. Very few were clicking on full cylinders, but all of them looked like top 25 teams, held their own. And you pointed out, too, even TCU.
Yep. Yeah, I get it. Look at the final score. TCU 1-1 against a bottom 50 team. Bottom 50 is generous. Bottom 20 team in the country at home. They didn't shoot the ball particularly well, especially in the first half, as you said. But if you look at the minutia, there are a lot of things to like. They got punched in the face, right? They had a really rough first 10 minutes. they outscored Arkansas Pine Bluff by 21 down the stretch, which if you take that last 30-minute stretch, that's 17. So there were 7 other teams that had a smaller margin of victory out of the top 25 than TCU would have had if the first 10 minutes didn't happen. Still shot 71% from the free throw line, which will continue to get better, but that's promising. They didn't struggle from the free throw line. Out-rebounded Arkansas Pine Bluff. Offensive rebounds weren't as high as you would like to see against a team like Pine Bluff, but still, 11 offensive boards is pretty good. The one thing that you can criticize legitimately is the lack of assists. And when you were watching the game, even when they started to come back, there were a lot of errant passes. There were a lot of these issues from the guard play. Not necessarily Mike Miles in particular, but like just all around guard play for TCU that needs to improve. Mike Miles finished with just 3 assists. He was part of the issue. But they didn't foul much. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they have far more talent than Pine Bluff, so more talented teams tend to get fouled more when there's a lopsided talent gap like that. Didn't really turn the ball over all that much. Their issues were shooting. And I think if you look at the free throws, which is a better indication of how teams will shoot throughout the course of the year, I feel like, than looking at one game of 19% shooting from 3. It looked pretty decent. So TCU, for me, again, Creighton struggled early. They just didn't get punched in the face. A lot of these teams struggled early. They just didn't get that punch in the face. But the fact that TCU was able to take that punch, go down 20, and win that game, maybe not, 14, they're going to drop probably on Monday, even though they won. They're probably going to drop because that's going to stick in people's minds in the rankings. But a team that's not in the top 25 or not much further outside the top 25 than 5 to 10 might lose that game 60 to 70% of the time.
Florida State did.
Yeah.
Florida State is that team, and they lost to Stetson, and they never really got to a point where they were challenging to win that game late either.
Yeah, and I mean, the only other big comeback that you can think of, right, the Grand Canyon comeback against Montana State was pretty big. That was the one where I had picked Montana State. I saw the first half, thought it looked good, so I shut off the game.
Kiss of death.
And that was an issue. But yeah, I mean, they Arkansas Pine Bluff at the 3-minute mark, I think most analytics had them as the probable winner at that point, from 3 minutes in the first half to about halftime. And then late in the second half, when they went on their little mini run between 8 and 4 minutes, was, again, it looked like they might win. But TCU held them off. And it didn't look impressive, but at least they won. At least they showed the ability to win. And once you get past the top 5 to 10, the ability to win matters to me more than looking dominant against bad competition. It's the ability to grind it out is what makes the difference between, I hate to say this, between the Texas Techs of the last couple of years and the Providences of last year. That's what you're looking at.
Because Providence was in another close game against Ryder. If it wasn't for, forget the name of the Ryder guard who had the ball, but stumbling over his own feet, they potentially lose there. Providence stays the luckiest team in the country, still carried over to this season. You brought up one thing about TCU and their lack of assists. And that was something we saw with a couple teams the first couple days as well, most notably UNC. And I think there are twofold things that need to be talked about with this. Because, number one, this is why coaches like having these games to warm up into the season, to get everybody on the same page, playing together. I know they have those exhibition games that we talked about, but regular season games have a different feel, and it's a different deal. The other part, teams like TCU, teams like UNC, a ton of hype going into the season. UNC, obviously preseason number 1, expected to contend for a national title again after being in that game last year. TCU, supposed to have one of, if not the best season in school history, right? That's a lot to put on college kids to handle. Now, they're going to have to handle them, but along with that, Mike Miles is your Big 12 preseason player of the year. Everybody loves Eddie Lampkin, right? Armando Bacot, people picking him to win national player of the year. Can Caleb Love turn into an NBA draft pick? Same thing with RJ Davis, right? All of these individual guys have spent the last 5 months hearing about how good they're supposed to be as a team and how good they're supposed to be individually. And I know in UNC's case, watching that, it translated to TCU for the first part where they're missing a lot of those shots too. A lot of those guys were making individual plays to try and create shots for themselves. They weren't making plays to try and create and see what was there, right? There was still a little bit more of that individualistic style of play that we know from the way both of them played last season will be ironed out over time. There's probably an issue of first game nerves, jitters, wanting to set the tone for the season, and you end up forcing things. There's a reason you hear coaches talk a lot about letting the game come to you and not pressing things, because when you do, you can lead to some individualistic plays and poor shot selection. And that was a lot of the problem there. I think we'll see both UNC, TCU, some of these other teams with lower assist totals find the rhythm, settle down as much when it's not the first game, and they know what they're doing. It's not new, and there's not the excitement and jitters and everything like that. Both of them will be fine. If it continues, then there's a different discussion. But I really doubt it will for both of them, considering what we saw from each of them last year.
Well, and to be fair to TCU, like their issue wasn't that they weren't trying to pass the ball. And if you look at their assist numbers to total made baskets, like it was 13 assists to 22 made baskets. So nearly 2/3 of their baskets were off of assists. There were 7 total assists, not 7 for North Carolina. 7 total assists in that game between UNC Wilmington and North Carolina.
UNC had 4 as a team.
The only multi-assist player in the game was Pete Nance.
Which is wild.
He also took, like, you look at shot totals, Armando Bacot 10 makes sense. Like, Leaky Black took 7, RJ Davis and Caleb Love took 11 and 12. Pete Nance only took 3 shots in that game, and he played the 3rd most minutes of anybody on UNC.
Well, that's part of it too, right? He's the guy who's trying to fit in to those other 4, right? The other 4 have their roles and are trying to show that they can be this awesome team, and Pete Nance is trying to, still at this point, find out where he fits in, make everybody else happy, not stir things up because he's a newcomer, and so he probably should have taken more shots. He's a better player than that. He probably should have had 7, and Leaky should have had 3. Yeah. But that's part of the deal right now, is everybody finding the rhythm, and I'm okay with teams having a week to really figure that out before we get some of those high-profile matchups, because we're getting college basketball back. Right, that's the exciting part. A lot of these sports have their best games start off the bat, and again, it's great. It would have been awesome to have the Champions Classic. I don't know why you can't have the Champions Classic on Monday and why it always has to be on a Tuesday, but that's besides the point.
And to put it into perspective, bring it to football for a second. Mm-hmm. Georgia probably still wins this matchup, but how much better would the Georgia-Oregon game be if it was played now, or even played in late September as opposed to the literal first game those teams played?
Right. And in Oregon's case, right, first game of the head coach, first game of the new quarterback, everything was new. And Oregon has not lost since then and has been rolling teams.
And Bo Nix looks ridiculously good now for Oregon.
Yeah. Bo Nix is a Heisman candidate.
Yeah.
And people were talking about him being benched after that Georgia game, which was fair at the time. But yeah, that's one aspect of it, too. And you also see these sports, college football being one of them, who play a lot of high-profile games that first night, or the first day, first weekend. And it is awesome. It's great for fans. I love it. You love it. Again, we would have, I think, enjoyed some high-profile matchups. At the same time, there is kind of a lull after that. You're like, all right, it's back. These games are great. Week 2 and week 3 are kind of until conference play gets going. There tends to be a step back. Now we're kind of ramping up into things, college basketball-wise. You got the initial bump of it being back. Yeah, there may have not been in as many games that casual college basketball fans are tuning into like there would be the Champions Classic. But you had the excitement of the sport being back, and now we're raising the level again going into the weekend. Once we get some of those games, there's not that lull. The anticipation for games is going up.
Yep. And there were still teams that impressed. I was really impressed with Houston.
Yeah, it's
and I know
not,
they didn't like it. They didn't do what Baylor did, right? And they didn't have that standalone game that Baylor had. But I mean, if you look at it, Dalen Kuntz, who I've been pumping up as like he could lead the country in scoring this year, one of the best mid-major scoring guards in the country. They held to 0 of 9 from the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Tremont Mark and Marcus Sasser combined
so good
for 6 of 12 from 3. Like for a team that could barely buy a basket last year, those two came back. You were wondering how is Sasser going to look coming back. They played well. Jamal Shed, might not be the top scorer for this team, but as a distributing point guard, pure point guard, he was just dishing it out to everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so, that defense looks just as good as we thought it was going to be on the perimeter, but the offense, and I know it's against Northern Colorado, their defense isn't great, but from a shooting perspective, for Houston to go out and shoot at 38%, to me is a good sign for their offense moving forward, because we know how good that defense is going to be. But there were questions about were they going to be able to score still, and I think we got our answer. I think Marcus Sasser started out the season looking like a true National Player of the Year candidate.
Yes. I don't want to go all the way there with Jeremy Roach about him being a National Player of the Year candidate. But I had some doubts coming into the season about him being that guy for Duke. And I still don't know if he'll be that guy for Duke all season. But I don't know if they beat Jacksonville as comfortably as they did without him the first night. I was at that game, was lucky enough to be there, wanted to do Shire's first game. And first off, no drop-off, really, in terms of on-court execution from Shire to Coach K. The last couple of years, we've talked about this too. Coach K's offense was kind of roll the ball out. All right, you guys, you're really good. Let's go figure this thing out. That wasn't the case with Shire. They were running some really good half-court stuff, some things Jacksonville made them do. But they ran some really good half-court sets and executed at a high level, which you don't expect a team as young as Duke to do, particularly when they were missing Derek Whitehead and Derek Lively. So that was impressive for me for Duke. And Jeremy Roach, his confidence level, and also the way the rest of that team looked at him to make a play, impressed me. I don't think he'll be the top guy again. I don't think he'll be a National Player of the Year candidate. But if he's that third option behind Derek Lively and Derek Whitehead, Duke can be a very, very good team if Whitehead and Lively obviously meet expectations. And Lively's going to be back next game against USC Upstate. Whitehead's going to be out for a little while. But the toughness and just confidence he showed was much different than last year. I'm starting to buy into, I think, a little bit more of him being an all-ACC kind of player. So that was fun to watch and get to see in person. Another team I want to make sure that we talk about here is having a good start. Our Aztecs, you brought it up in your article, right? It was a rough offensive game for Matt Bradley. They were only up 7 at halftime, and then, boom, there they went.
Yeah, I mean, and what we were saying all offseason with regards to the two pieces they added on offense showed up in that first 10 minutes right out the gate, right? And if you go through the scoring, right out the gate, Matt Bradley makes a layup. Lamont Butler makes a jumper. Darian Trammell makes a three. Keyshawn Johnson gets a dunk and then gets fouled, gets a free throw. Matt Bradley dunks it on the other end. Lamont Butler hits a three. Darian Trammell hits another three. Darian Trammell made,
by the way, took 7 shots. He scored 18 points.
Yeah.
He missed 1 and hit 4 threes. Like, he was every bit as good, at least in the opener, as I think we were hoping he would be.
In the first 7 minutes right out the gate, I believe Trammell and Micah Parrish hit 4 threes.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Was there a 7-minute stretch last year at all where San Diego State hit 4 threes?
No, they go
you'd be hard pressed to find it.
That. Yeah.
You have to really like what you saw from San Diego State. One of the biggest, not head scratchers, but most interesting things to me was how little Jaden Ledee played.
18 minutes. Yeah.
Played 18 minutes. He didn't start. Keyshawn Johnson started.
Mm-hmm.
Ledee played that kind of sixth man role. I mean, Micah Parrish was the sixth man, but Ledee played more minutes than Johnson. Went 4 of 9, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. He's not coming off the bench much longer. Micah Parrish, I think, is good as a put him in and boost the scoring off the bench. But the way Jaden Ledee played off the bench and the fact that he kind of was the one on the floor in that second half, to me, indicates Keyshawn Johnson's on a short leash. You can't bring any of the 3 guards to the bench.
No.
Nathan Mensah is going to start. I think Johnson is going to be on a short leash, given what you saw from Ledee in that first game. And obviously, Maui's going to be a lot more telling. But that San Diego State, that second half made me feel a lot more confident about what we will see from San Diego State down the stretch of the non-conference, but also once they hit conference play. I'm not going to predict that they run the table, but I don't think it's out of the question that they do.
It's one of those deals where I will have a hard time finding a game that I don't think they'll win or be favored in, just because of the way the schedule sets up and some of the question marks of other teams in the Mountain West. The only reason I think I'd pick them to lose a couple games, or just assume that right now, is because teams don't go undefeated, so they're bound to slip up somewhere. But if you look at every game on a one-off basis, I think I'm with you. I think I'd favor them in pretty much every game that they would play.
And the schedule sets up well for them because they play both road games against Wyoming and Colorado State early on in the Mountain West play. Colorado State, obviously, I think it's going to be a good matchup. When they go and play Wyoming, what Graham Ike shows up? Is he in full midseason form? Because it's all hands on deck to beat the San Diego State team, and Ike is a massive part of that for Wyoming. So, the schedule sets up really well for San Diego State, not necessarily to run the table, but to have as few losses as possible and to put themselves in positions to win as much as possible heading into the conference tournament in Vegas.
And in case you're worried about San Diego State's defense, they held Cal State Fullerton below 40% shooting, held them to roughly 18% shooting from 3, forced 18 turnovers, and got 12 steals. They're still elite defensively. I know we talk about assist-turnover ratio all the time. Sometimes I look at steal-turnover ratio because then you can see how many times you gave it up and then got it back. It's 12 and 12. They had a 1-to-1. Every time San Diego State gave it up, they got it back. They're still pretty good defensively.
Trammell and Butler
didn't happen.
Trammell and Butler combined for 7 steals between the two of them.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just the steals number, right? They stole the ball 12 times. They forced 6 non-steal turnovers as well. They're so good that even the steal number, I don't think, tells the whole story for a team like San Diego State defensively, because
Yeah.
they are so long and so big that like they just force errant passes at times, which is a good thing for them to have. But obviously the added kind of oomph from three, where Trammell and Parrish combined 5 of 6 from three, like that is much needed for San Diego State, considering their returners. They were 5 of 6. The returners were 3 of 12. Like, those two additions cannot be overstated how important they will be for the Aztecs moving forward.
I want to stick on the West Coast.
Okay.
Because
Was I right?
the main conference out there did not do well.
Wow. Was I right about USC?
You were right about USC. Maybe Andy Enfield wanted to just give Florida Gulf Coast a nice boost. Give Pat Chambers a good start to the season, but they didn't look very good.
No, and man, they looked like they had no alpha on that team. Boogie Ellis tried to be that. He was a volume scorer, and a volume scorer in the negative sense of the term. Good from the free throw line, but you never want to shoot almost. I mean, he almost shot 1/3. Like, he was 5 of 13 from the floor. They gave up 74 points. Again, Drew Peterson looked like a really good glue guy. 9 rebounds.
Who would have thought?
6 assists. He had a block in there. 2 of 6 from the floor. 7 points. And no other player, the only other player who shot more than Peterson, other than Boogie Ellis, was Trey White. And he went 3 of 7. So there were, I think, 2 players on USC who shot over 50% from the floor. 3 players on USC. Kajani Wright, the freshman, shot 2 of 3. Joshua Morgan shot 3 of 4. And then Malik Thomas, I think, came off the bench in like 9 minutes and went 2 of 3. But they got out rebounded by 11. Who would have thunk that you take the Mobleys out of USC and all of a sudden their work on the boards goes down. Gave up 16 offensive boards.
Goodness. So like Florida Gulf Coast isn't some like giant mid-major team. Yeah, like they're fine, but that just USC looks soft inside.
Yeah, I mean, and Joshua Morgan played well. Like, you look at it, like, Joshua Morgan had 7 blocks, 9 boards. Drew Peterson had a block and 9 boards. And they got 35 boards. So that was 18 for 2 players and 17 combined for everyone else.
Right.
That has to improve. I'm sure it will. I'm sure they're going to go back to the drawing board and look at this and realize that they just lost to a team who shot 37.5% from the field and 29% from 3. But, I mean, they weren't the only team in the Pac-12 that lost or almost lost to a team that didn't shoot the ball particularly well in that game.
I was going to say, I think we had a conversation on the podcast about where Cal would finish in the Big West. After that first game against UC Davis, we know it's not first.
Right. It was the first UC Davis win over Cal in 34-35 meetings. Granted, UC Davis did shoot the ball well. 48% from the floor, 42% from 3. My dig was more so to the barely scraping out a win for Bobby Hurley. But Cal got out-rebounded again. Another Pac-12 team getting out-rebounded. Who would have thunk you take Andre Kelly out of Cal, and all of a sudden they can't rebound the ball. Low assist total. Just all around, like, just a bleh performance. Couldn't shoot the ball. Devin asked, talk about volume. Devin Askew took 20 shots in that game.
If Devin Askew is taking 20 shots for your team, it's not a good sign. It's not a
scored
good
19
sign.
points.
Oh my gosh.
He went 1 of 6 from 3.
One of those two was a half court heave or a full court heave at the end of the first half when there was 4 seconds left on the clock.
But I mean, this is the issue with Cal, right? They don't care about. I won't say they don't care about sports. The area around Cal, the normal non-alumni fans care more about their sports than the actual alumni and current students do. And you know, I think Cal's going to have to go to the drawing board on the coach, because the expectation from Cal's coach is compete, not win, compete. When you're losing to UC Davis by 10 at home in your opener, that's not a good sign for competing.
No, not in the slightest. Let's go ahead and look ahead to some of those games that are this weekend. We'll start with the aircraft carrier game. Gonzaga, Michigan State. Both teams 1-0, relatively untested, I think I'd say, in their openers. What are you looking for in this game?
Well, first of all, I think I don't know how much we're going to be able to glean from this game.
It's because it's outside. It's
outside, which means that you're looking at a lot of layups and rebounds. Like, those are the two most important, hitting free throws. Three ball is probably not going to be a big piece, which for Gonzaga is great, because if you saw if you were watching that game, they were blowing out North Florida, and then you looked at the total number of threes they took, and you're like, they only took how many? Mm-hmm. But they obviously, I think, have the advantage inside against Michigan State. So from that perspective, you're looking at a team that should win this game. I don't think I'll take anything out of this game unless one team blows out the other, because there's so much fluky stuff that can happen in an outdoor game on an aircraft carrier that, if Michigan State wins, does that mean Gonzaga's going to be bad this year or not a top 5, top 10 team? No. If Michigan State runs the floor with Gonzaga, out-rebounds Gonzaga, does things like that, then you're talking a different tune. Mm-hmm. Gonzaga beats Michigan State. Does that mean Gonzaga's a top 5 team? No. If they run the floor with Michigan State, then you get some vindication on things that you might have questions about. Interior defense being the primary one, right?
Yeah.
The post-Chet Gonzaga, you like what you saw out of Efton Reed and Anton Watson in that game, but that was North Florida. What do they do against... And, not elite front court, but an upgraded front court from what they faced in their opener.
Yeah. Thank you for saying not elite. I think, Michigan State, I think this is going to be telling how they handle Drew Timme, or try to, because their front court is not great, and there's not a lot of depth there. I'm fully expecting them to lose, and I think that's fine. What I'm looking for if I'm Michigan State is how do my guards play? How's my backcourt look? I'm just going to concede that Drew Timme is going to dominate Jackson Kohler and do what he wants to do. But if my guards can hang with Gonzaga's and play that to a relative push, then I know I have something to build on moving forward.
Yep.
I don't think they will, but if I'm Michigan State or Michigan State fan, that's what I'm looking for as a sign of progress and hope for the rest of the season.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There are 2 other games Friday night that probably aren't on the major radar of a casual fan, but you have Liberty going to play Alabama, Darius McGee going to play Alabama. That game's going to be a lot of fun. And then Eastern Michigan against Michigan, which is on ESPNU, just to see Amani Bates go up against Michigan and watch that. To me, both of those will be fun games to monitor. Both mid-major teams, Eastern Michigan and Liberty, have star players that have professional futures. You can say what you want about Amani Bates. He has a professional future, whether it's in the NBA or somewhere else. But those are 2 games that intrigue me. Are there any others that you're looking at, or what about those games might you be interested in?
Yeah, I am looking. This is Thursday, so tonight, Vermont against St. Mary's. Two teams that are looking for, obviously Vermont needs to win their conference to get a tournament bid. St. Mary's does not. But you're looking at what Aiden Mahaney does in his second game. St. Mary's has never really had a freshman guard do what Aiden Mahaney did on day one for their team. So I'm looking at that. That should be a good mid-major matchup. Belmont Furman. We're all high at heat check on Furman and their ability to compete. Belmont obviously historically has been a really good team. Furman, I think, if they don't win that game, it's not a referendum on Furman, but I think winning that game and winning it big, I think will do a lot for their confidence. From a high major perspective, that Brew City battle between Stanford and Wisconsin.
Yep.
Two teams that people are iffy on, right? People think they're a tournament team. People don't think they're a tournament team. Stanford didn't look good in their opener. Talking about Pac-12 teams not looking good. But this is a game that I think you can reasonably say could go either way. Wisconsin has the crowd advantage. But I don't think they have a player with the upside of Harrison Ingram. We didn't see it in the first game from him. But, all it takes for him really is to flip that switch. So I think whichever team wins this game, people will take more seriously. Again, not to say that it won't happen down the stretch. I think it's more important for Stanford than it is for Wisconsin, because Wisconsin has more opportunities for bubble-defining games or even pulling themselves off the bubble down the stretch than Stanford will. But as far as Friday games go, that's the big one for me. St. Peter, Seton Hall, for obvious reasons.
Yep. Yeah, the weekend is relatively light, and probably expect that with college football late in the season, then NFL Sunday, crossing the halfway point of the year. That's understandable. Next week, then, I think is where we then ramp back up. Champions Classic, obviously the main part of that. That will have been played by the time we record our next episode. So I'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch on that here. I don't think talked about Duke, talked about Kansas, talked about Michigan State. I haven't talked about Kentucky yet, though. And Kentucky did what they're supposed to do while being shorthanded. So I don't know how much we learned about the Wildcats in that first game. I honestly don't know how much we learned about really any of these teams in that first game. But you also wrote about Kentucky in your article that's up on HeatCheckCV.com about your 10 biggest takeaways from the opening weekend. What was that takeaway for you for the Wildcats?
Yeah, I think it is that you're starting to see Antonio Reeves is the guy they need. C.J. Frederick obviously was a solid shooter at Iowa, but all Antonio Reeves did for Kentucky in the game one was score and shoot. All they really need Antonio Reeves to do this year is to shoot. He went 6 of 12 from deep for a team leading 22 points. He's not going to lead the team in points every game. Obviously, you have Cason Wallace and you have Oscar Shibwe, but if he is just that spot-up shooter off the bench, Kentucky's ceiling goes from really solid team to national title contender. Because, again, we talk about that 35-36% threshold from deep that teams need to hit in order to be competitive for a national championship. And when you have a player, I don't think he'll shoot 50% this season, but he'll shoot maybe in the 40 to 45% range. When you have that type of player that can do that, especially at a volume of 12 shots, I think it's going to be good for Reeves. He's going to help spread the floor. C.J. Frederick obviously is right there as well as a floor spacer, but Reeves had the immediate impact, and so that's what stood out to me from Kentucky. Because again, like you said, you can't really take away a lot outside of that.
Mm-hmm. Wildcats played Michigan State in that first Champions Classic game on Tuesday. I know we don't know if Sheboy is going to play. I don't think we know the status of some of the other guys for Kentucky who were out. But I still don't think Kentucky's really going to have much of an issue in that game. If they do, I would sound alarm bells in Lexington. But to me, Kentucky should be a clear favorite in that one.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, the forwards for Kentucky looked good. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you don't have Sheboy, but do you need him to beat the Michigan State front court?
No. No.
So I think that game, Kentucky should win still, and that's what I was. I was on a podcast earlier this offseason. They asked me about the early impact of losing Sheboy, and really, they just need him back by the Gonzaga game. You don't need him to beat Michigan State.
Yeah.
And I know you like Hauser. I don't like Hauser as a center. No, that's what he is.
Yeah.
So, if it were me, and this might be, I hate the fact that the Memphis-St. Louis game is at the same time as Duke-Kansas, because I'd much rather watch that Memphis-St. Louis game than the Kentucky-Michigan State game. Especially if Kentucky's missing their two players, because then it's it'll be competitive, but what are you really taking away from it? Where Memphis looked really good. Yeah. St. Louis we expect to be really good and looked really good. Those are two teams that I feel should be watched.
Yeah.
But they just have to compete with the better of the two Champions Classic matchups.
Yeah, well, those are the last two things I want to talk about. We'll start with that last Champions Classic matchup, Duke and Kansas. That's the intriguing game to me. Both are replacing a lot. Both Final Four teams from a year ago. Kansas doesn't really have a true center as well. Experimenting with the roster, trying to find the guy, see if Jalen Wilson can be that. Mentioned them experimenting KJ Adams at the 5 because they don't have that front court depth. And then Duke, Derek Lively should be playing in that game. We'll see what happens with Tariq Whitehead. But there too, can Jeremy Roach be that guy in that game? Can Filipkowski be more consistent? What do we get from Tyrese Proctor? To me, that is because it's in the second week, and not necessarily to open the game, that makes it a more real find out what we have and find out what's working and find out what really doesn't for both these teams. I think it's a very good early measuring stick game, and whoever wins that should come out feeling good. I actually think Duke probably wins that game. I feel more comfortable about what Duke has, particularly Duke's size, than Kansas, but I expect it to be a pretty good game nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, with Duke, you talk about Filipowski, obviously the ceiling, we saw it. He used to be more consistent. Jeremy Roach looked like a veteran guard. Mm-hmm. I really liked what I saw from Mark Mitchell. It
was obvious there. One is athleticism, and two, just how much energy he brings and needed energy he brought to that Duke team.
But we spent all off season talking about Grandison, right? The transfer prize.
Yeah.
What about Ryan Young?
Young,
he didn't look he didn't pop off the page until you see the fact that he didn't miss a shot. He got 7 boards, 5 of them on the offensive end, 2 assists, 3 steals. He just looked like a veteran forward.
Yep.
And he looked like he knew what his role was, and he was filling his role to near perfection.
He looked like, both from a stat line and production and the way he played, like the old guy at the Y who always is in the right spot and you don't know how. That was how Ryan Young played, and he put himself in good positions, didn't try to do anything other than what he wanted to do. brought great intensity, understood his limitations, and worked with that. It worked well. It worked well. Yep. Duke playing those two big guys, I think it's something we're going to see a lot this year. That's something that John Shire talked about. Typically, those bigs will be Filipowski and Derek Lively, but having Young in there to anchor that, not provide rim protection, but rebounding, just more size down low, which you can have from a spacing standpoint because Lively and particularly Filipowski can stretch the floor a little bit. Filipowski definitely can. Having him in there doesn't hurt them. So you pair that to a two-big lineup for Duke that's efficient and productive with a Kansas team that's struggling to figure out what they want to do at the 5. The best case scenario right now is putting KJ Adams, who's 6'7", at the 5. Elite athlete, but there's a big difference between that going up against two essentially 7-footers. I think that's where Duke finds the advantage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be one of the biggest games of the week, Duke, Kansas. I mean, when you're talking about Kansas, again, like you said, they had their issues early on. They ended up winning by 25 against Omaha, but there are definite issues outside the fact that Grady Dick is probably going to be one of the most hated players in college basketball this year.
We knew that too. We knew that.
We knew that.
We knew that. Just confirmed. You brought it up with Memphis St. Louis, but Tuesday is also just a great college basketball night outside of the Champions Classic. Memphis St. Louis is going to be a really fun game that probably could have that large implications once we get to March. That'll be a really fun game. San Diego State going on the road to Stanford after playing BYU this week. That's a pretty good tune-up from out of there from San Diego State. We've seen Pac-12 teams struggle. Oregon's hosting Montana State, and a decent Montana State team that, if Oregon tries to sleepwalk through that game, could make things interesting. Alabama is going on the road to South Alabama, a pretty good South Alabama team that has experience and power conference size. A little interesting there. Dayton also going on the road to play UNLV in Vegas. That's the first real test of, okay, has this Dayton team really grown in the way we think they have? Nothing that obviously screams out the same way that the Champions Classic does. Memphis St. Louis is obviously the best other game out there that night. But I think all those other games have intrigue and could potentially be ones where you're scoreboard watching and going, oh, I need to flip to that.
Yeah, I mean, Cal goes on the road against UC San Diego, could potentially be 0-2 against the Big West by the end of next week.
Oh, no.
Could you imagine?
Oh, no.
By the time, because we're going to start going weekly on Thursdays, Gonzaga, Texas, that game's going to have been played by the time the next episode comes out.
Yeah.
Depending on when we record, we might be recording during that game.
We'll record after.
Colorado, Tennessee, this weekend.
Could be interesting. Yep. Which Colorado landing 5-star prospect is kind of, I don't follow recruiting that closely up until it gets to a point where we're evaluating them for the season. But Colorado landing a 5-star kid felt like it kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah. And I've kind of softened my stance on Tad Boyle. I think he needed the talent. He's getting the talent next year.
Yeah.
And so, but Colorado against Tennessee, I think, will be a good test for Tennessee. Not necessarily because I think Colorado is top 25 caliber. They're not. But again, like I've said before on this show, they outcompete every team they play. Mm-hmm. They play extremely physical in a way that Gonzaga does not, especially on the perimeter. And so you're looking at this Tennessee team. Yes, they've looked good so far. But Colorado, I think, is the first team that can punch them in the mouth in a way that's not just scoring in runs, but is really like, we're going to be super physical with you the entire game. Mm-hmm. How do you respond? And then the other game that we didn't mention yet is Marquette Purdue, the Gavitt tip-off games. I think both those teams, it's do we trust them?
Right.
Purdue looked pretty good. They had stretches where that defense looked like the defense that we've come to know, but they won by 31 with Zach Edey only going 4 of 13. And so, offensively there's room to grow, but I think defensively you saw a lot from Purdue that you really liked and you really wish you saw last year. And Braden Smith is going to be the most annoying player in the country this year.
What makes you say that?
He was just so pesky. Like, I just, like if my brother wasn't a Purdue grad and I wasn't rooting for Purdue to do well, and liking what I saw, like, he was just such a pesky player. And I think it's going to be fun to watch, but, he's good without being like, oh yeah, he's good. Mm-hmm. Like, you get beat by Braden Smith, you're like, oh, I just got beat by that dude. Whereas, like, you get beat by some of these other freshmen, it's like, oh, like, you expect that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's funny. Yeah. That's good. That's a good way to put it. Good note to end the show on, too. Got games back. By the time we talk to you again next time, there will have been a lot more to talk about. Certainly things that will have told us more about who teams are and had bigger implications. But the sport is back. We've started this 5-month journey into the early April. Can't wait. It's been a lot of fun so far. Already been pretty eventful. Had a couple buzzer beaters opening night, which felt nice. It
felt fantastic. We had buzzer beaters. We had upsets. We had good teams looking good. Mm-hmm. Like the teams that struggled, UNC, some new players coming off a run, didn't look good the majority of last year. Made sense. Creighton, a lot of players. You're expecting a sophomore leap. You have some new players. They lost their 2 best shooters. You expected it. Arkansas, a bunch of new freshmen. You expected it. Duke early, a bunch of new freshmen. You expected it. TCU, again, similar to Creighton. Just a lot of improvement you were expecting to see that didn't materialize until 10 minutes into the game, apparently. You expected some struggle. So the fact that they struggled doesn't bother me. What would have bothered me is if they struggled and didn't adjust. Mm-hmm. But every team in the top 25, with the exception of like Villanova for some reason, adjusted in the second half and kind of just pulled away. I know it doesn't show on the scoreboard because TCU had to come back, but the second half adjustments from basically every top 25 team looked good.
Yeah.
Outside of Villanova being outscored by 1 against LaSalle. But again, they're missing probably their 2 best players. So.
Yeah. I think there was some load management that kind of happened where they scaled it back a little bit and we're like, we have this, we can ramp back up if we need to, but I think we're okay. And the way Caleb Daniels was playing too, I think certainly lent itself to that as well. Well, thank you guys very much for listening or watching, whoever you consume this episode of Heat Check Hangout. Remember, we are on YouTube. You can find us there. Subscribe. Anywhere, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can find us anywhere you listen to your podcast as well. Whichever avenue you go to, make sure you rate, review, 5 stars, all the good stuff that every podcast you listen to tells you to do. It'll help us out tremendously. Make sure you tell a friend as well. We want to make sure that we grow and are having as many people enjoy this hangout as possible. It's my co-host, Connor Hope. I'm Brian Rauf. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. We'll talk to you again next time.
Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, college. Whoa. Basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.